Hey guys, it is John here. What you're about to watch is a practice test review I did for one of the students in Mission 1400 Plus. Basically what happened is he took a full SAT practice test, he sent me the full recording of it, and this video is going to go over all of my thoughts on this practice test for both reading and writing and math, everything you need to do to improve. Also, I went through a bunch of the questions from the practice test so he could understand how to do it better. If you want me to do the exact same thing on a practice test that you take, just join Mission 1400 Plus with the link in description below. We currently have a 7-day free trial. I'm actually going to be doing a thing where if you just join on the free trial, as long as you're staying for those 7 days, I will actually just do it for free just for you being there in the free trial. It gives me good YouTube content and it helps you, so I see it as a beneficial thing for all of us here. I only am keeping that offer open until August 14th though. After that, you will have to be on the full paid membership to get any kind of practice test review for Mission 1400 Plus. I'll also say on this practice test, there's a bunch of things where yes, he did score a 1400 on the test, but it will apply just as well for you if you're in the 1200 or lower range, because all this stuff is in terms of SAT strategy as a whole, and there are some mistakes that can keep showing up again and again even once you get past the 1200 range. So definitely feel like this can still help you even if you are lower than a 1400 right now for your score. Alright, with that being said, let's get into the video and I hope you guys enjoy. Okay, so hey again, here are my thoughts on this practice test. So obviously you got a 1400 here, still a little bit lower than you were hoping to achieve on the real thing. But I definitely noticed some pretty good improvement from the last practice test, and there's also some very clear things on what you need to improve. So all of that looks really good heading forward. So here's the main stuff. Again, I have a bit more, I guess, in the reading section this time than some past ones, but that's just because I really try to look a bit closer into the reading stuff to see what was still hurting you here. First thing I really want to point out here is some uncertainty about some of the grammar questions here. I noticed there were so many grammar questions in this test where you got a lot of them right, for sure, like you had a very good accuracy in grammar, but it just felt like you were spending a lot more time than you needed to. Like you just like looking at the question, it felt like you were just unsure of the choice in times when I really felt like you should have maybe been able to just like go for the choice and immediately go on. One example of this could have been this one here. I noticed like you're really down between these two, and I think it should be a pretty easy choice for D here just because it's pretty clear that there's some kind of extension, and as long as you know that, it's definitely a colon rather than a semicolon. So stuff like that, I could just suggest to you to do more practice. That's the easy thing. But in addition to that, I would really point out, try every single time you do a grammar question from now on to really think in your mind, what is the exact rule that's making this choice correct? It won't always be able to help you, but most times, if you actually think about what it is that's causing this to be right, you're going to just feel a little more comfortable with the choice because you'll think to yourself, okay, there's actually a logical reason why I'm choosing this one. It's not just based off of vibes, so it's not really any clear way I could even be wrong if I thought I was. This is one thing that got me a lot more confident with grammar questions. Whenever I try to do a grammar question, I usually think about this, think what rule am I actually using to say that this answer is correct. Second thing, just a smaller thing with grammar, the odd one out rule. So the thing with has versus have, like, whether there is an S at the end of each verb. I would actually suggest to stop really relying solely on this. I noticed there's that one question here, I think in module 2, where you just basically went for it immediately and without even really thinking about it because you sort of had the odd one out rule. The SAT has been trying to push back a little bit on this in recent tests, so I think there's definitely a chance that there could be some questions that may look like it follows the odd one out rule that actually don't. So I would actually suggest, you can still use the odd one out rule to be a bit more confident for a choice. Like you may think, okay, it probably is going to be answer C because that's the only singular one, but actually still just like take an extra second to check what is being shown there just to make absolute sure. I know this might sound like it kind of contradicts with the first one, but it's just like, do this, do the first one on most of the grammar questions, but for this one, just add a bit more time to what you're doing. But besides that, usually it's just number 1. 3, another small thing. For student notes questions, I noticed there were some times where it seemed like, at least it seemed to me, like you were going through the notes first and then going through the choices. Like you almost just completely skipped the choices and just immediately went for the notes, and then you were going back to the choices at the end. I would always suggest first just start with the choices. Even if it looks like it's probably going to be one where you'll have to read the notes, it helps to do the choices first just to see what is the main difference. Like for example, is the main difference the fact that this one says 12% and another one says 18%? Is the main difference that one of them just says information that completely contradicts another one? So that way with that, you'll be able to have an easier time looking at this to find whatever is going wrong and, figure out that thing. You can easily just see, okay, if I'm looking for the 12% thing, I can just easily check that here. If I'm looking for some kind of specific piece of information, I can just check that here. So yeah, on these, first look at the question, then look at the choices, and then look at the notes after that, just to make absolute sure and differentiate if you need to. Don't do the notes first in any situation. Okay, on to some other stuff here. Vocab roots and prefixes. I'm not sure if you've memorized this yet. We've talked a little bit about this in some of the calls we've done, but really, if you haven't, make sure to memorize that full list of roots and prefixes. I think there might have been some of these vocab questions you maybe could have gotten right if you had done that. So this is a very useful thing. I give you that full guide here in Mission 1400 Plus. So 5, this is just a small thing, but when you're stuck between two choices on a reading passage question, it helps to really meticulously look for the unsupported part. Here's what I mean by that. So on this one, I'm not sure if this is one where you stuck between two, but I know there were some on this test that you were. If you're, for example, stuck between, let's say A and B here. Okay, yeah. So you would take both A and B and really try to look word by word and see, is it supported by the passage or not? That is the way to differentiate when you have two choices that both look like they are correct. So I would even look here. The text presents skepticism. Okay, does it present skepticism? Yes. Okay, moving on. As a disciplined approach, is it disciplined? There's something here about a very specific question to ask. So it seems very disciplined. Verify what you can. Okay, does it say something about verifying? Okay, then draw provisional conclusions. Okay, does it say, concluded so far? So that's the exact process you should go through when you're down between two. And then I would do the same thing with B, and I probably would notice here, the text argues that the museum should refuse any donation. Okay, nothing here about refusing donations. It doesn't say that anywhere or anything to even hint at that, so that would immediately be wrong, so I would get rid of B. What's really bad is when you get between two choices and you just try to go off of vibe, so this one feels a bit better, this one feels a bit worse. That's a really, not systematic way to do this, and it's very much more likely you're going to choose a wrong choice as a result of that if that is what you're doing. So always make sure to do that whenever you're stuck between two. 6, and this is a really big one. This honestly may be the most important out of all 7 of these. Skip the longer and harder passages and come back to them at the end. Time was a big factor for you in reading module 2 for sure on this. And so I would suggest when you're going through the passage question specifically, if you see one that you can tell is going to be very complicated, very long, like this thing, this is 2 very long passages. Each of these could be a passage in and of itself, and the choices don't seem to be that simple. I would suggest to skip this and come back to it at the end of the test. That's going to make it much more likely that you'll be able to definitely get through everything you can for sure get right, and then only come to these really long or really hard ones at the end of the test. Time probably would have been much less of an issue if you had done that on this rather than just trying to do through every single passage question immediately. Other reasons to skip passage questions could be if you can tell that it's a very data heavy one, like this one down here. I know this was one of the last ones, so it wouldn't have mattered too much on this, but if there was a very data heavy one, if there are choices that are really long, like if there are 4-line choices for every single one, or just anything that you can tell going into it is going to make it very complicated. If there's anything like that, just skip it and come back to it at the end. And then 7 here, this is kind of a more vague thing, but I really want to encourage you not to let stress confuse your understanding for these passages. I know a really big issue is when you get to the end of the test on these inferences questions and you are down to the last 5 minutes maybe, and you're going on probably the hardest question of the entire test, and you're trying to figure it out in a really short time frame. The thing I really want to encourage you is when you're in those situations, don't worry about the time. Just focus still on trying to understand the passage and do it the exact same way you always have been. Because when you're thinking about the time with reading these passages, that's how you start doing stuff like summarizing, that's how you start doing stuff like missing information, and that's how you get into situations where you read this and you don't understand a single thing that's being said. So it's easier said than done for sure, but just try to completely throw that out of your mind and still focus on doing the process exactly even when you get down to those time constraints. And the thing to also remember kind of with this idea is just the fact that if you have to skip even 1, 2, even as much as 3 questions and just go for a random answer because you run out of time, that is okay if you really maximize your accuracy with the other ones. If you could guarantee that you get all of the ones you actually attempt correct, it's okay to even just choose A for 3 choices because probably one of them is going to be right, and for the other 2 that you get wrong, you probably weren't going to get those right anyways. So that's just a good way to think about it. Don't worry as much about timing as maybe you are. You don't have to answer every single question on every single reading and writing module 2. Last thing I will say about reading and writing, I didn't include this as one of the things here, but I definitely noticed that your reading of the passages was taking maybe a bit longer than I would have liked you to. I don't list it here because I don't want you to be completely changing your strategy or anything for them. All I will say with this is that do some work with the reading comprehension drill if you can here in the community. I really want you to just get a little bit better at reading through the passages just so it will naturally take less and less time. Don't summarize, don't skim, don't do anything that's bad, that's changing your strategy as a result of this. I'm just saying I feel like you probably should be getting through the passages a bit faster than you are, and so that's more of just a skill thing that you need to work on at this point. Okay, let me get to some specific questions for reading and writing now. First, we have transitions. There are 2 things here that actually, both of these, I kind of noticed that I felt like you're choosing the wrong wrong answer while going through this the first time. So this is not just like me, saying this after the fact. And so let me tell you how I think you should have evaluated this going into it. So this one, it says archaeologists studying the civilization have long relied on inscriptions to reconstruct the histories. Then they talk about this new kind of technology they're now using, and now this offers a completely different, more broader way of analyzing all this stuff. So it's much better than what they're using before. So the big thing you have to think about this is, what is the key connection between these two sentences? As always, for every transition question, pretty much any choice could work. Any choice could work as a valid reason. We could even say that it's therefore. We could say that since it was so bad at first, now we have this new method. We can even say similarly, because they both are kind of similar in that they're talking about this exact same, civilization. However, we're trying to look for the one that best embodies what is actually going on here. And between however and recently, I think the answer pretty clearly actually is however, because even though the second one is more recent for sure, the main thing that they're trying to point out here is that this is better/different from the original thing. The first one was just like this very tedious, boring process. This is like a technological, in the future, brand new way of doing it. So the big thing they're trying to point out here is that they're different and they're a contradiction. The fact that one's more recent is, a nice factoid, but it's not really as important as this. So that's the way I kind of view this looking at it for the first time myself. And then a similar thing for this one, we'd say here they are researching beetles. They say ultraviolet imaging. I guess similar thing actually on this one. So they reveal patterns and then they weaken the camouflage explanation. Blank, one possibility is that the shell's ultraviolet patterning helps the beetles recognize potential mates. So they're saying that the camouflage explanation is not valid and we have this different one instead of it. Okay, I kind of just said the thing because it kind of works with it. But you could probably see now, yes, it is like a contradiction. It is something that's different from what's said before. But for these ones, you should always go for instead if it's saying one thing over another. If there's literally two separate things and they're choosing one instead of another one, instead is definitely going to be a much better choice than however. However is more in terms of just vague or abstract ideas. However, there was a factor that was not considered, something like that. Instead works better when there's actually one thing being chosen over another, like is being done here. So again, both could work, but this one definitely just a bit stronger and better embodies the connection. This one here, I'm going to go as far as to say that I actually do not think this one was marked correctly. I could potentially be wrong about this, but I actually really don't think so. I think you were correct with saying nevertheless here. That would follow the rule that I say for these questions. So I would not say to worry too much about this one, just to point that out. So if this was your only grammar question that you missed, which I think it was, really good job on the grammar here because you really got through a lot of these. Even despite the things I said, you got through them very well. Okay, on vocab here. So I already went over the roots and prefixes part of it. One more thing I just want to point out here is that I think it would really be beneficial to try to think a bit more about what the words probably mean. So when you're on the test like this, you're not going to be able to make a perfect estimate. You're not going to make a perfect guess because you don't know what the words mean, obviously. But it can be useful just to think, what do they look like they mean? And, what do I feel like they probably mean if I haven't seen that word before? So, for example, if we're looking at this one, although the dataset was massive and noisy, the research method distilled the information into a blank summary to highlight only the most consequential trends. So it's trying to say here that was a more small, more simple summary. So that's what's going on here. Ornate. If you have never seen that word before, ornate looks like ornament, Christmas ornaments, or just anything, ornamental, anything that sounds like a decorative, nice thing. That seems okay, but that's not really what's going on here. We're thinking about this like an ornament, like on a Christmas tree. That really doesn't embody what is going on here with the fact that they're trying to say only the most consequential, like it's a much more simple, shorter thing. That's not really what an ornament is. So having that extra kind of thought process on this probably could have gotten you more closer toward A as being the right answer, could have gotten you to choose that immediately. I saw in this one especially, it seemed like you kind of just went for ornate almost immediately. So definitely on this one, looking at the ones a little bit more probably would have been helpful. A similar thing on this one. After months of meticulous study, historian concluded that the diary's entries are not merely personal reflections, but a blank record intended to sway public opinion about the revolution. Okay, so they're saying here that it's they really put a lot of time into this. They want to make it so people, they want to change how people thought about this revolution that was going on there, change public opinion. And so for these choices now, if you're looking at them, if you see tangential, I assume you probably aren't too familiar with that word because it really doesn't work too well with this at all. But if you think about what this probably looks like, tangent, like a circle, you have a circle here, and then you have a line that just passes through at one point. Think about that for a second. It's kind of like, you're saying here that it's not entirely going through the heart of the idea. It's saying that's just passing through literally at one part, but not really going anywhere else next to it. So think about what that probably indicates then. It's probably saying an idea it's kind of connected, but but not really. That would be my thought process if I saw the word tangential for the first time, just literally based off of that and nothing else. And I think that is pretty much what tangential means. So that thought process as well could have maybe gotten you away from tangential and more toward calculated, which definitely works a lot better here. So see how you can be thinking a bit more about some of these vocab words you see. I finally hear on some passage stuff. This one is a very good one. I think there is a very key rule that you should understand from this. So just to summarize this, just to not read it again, they say here obviously that the brain, it consolidates stuff while sleeping, so you shouldn't cram on tests the night before, you shouldn't pull an all-nighter. And then they saw that people who slept less scored worse on the test than those who did not. It's asking they would both agree with which statement. And so we're really between A and D here for sure. And this is a situation where I would use, I think I said before, about looking word by word and trying to figure it out. So school should assign less homework so students can go to bed earlier. So less homework, like, do they even say the word homework anywhere in here? I really do not think so. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they say it anywhere. And so that alone is not necessarily a reason not to go for A. Like if they just don't say the word homework, maybe it's a fair inference. But the more important thing here is that they're just not bringing up homework as a factor at all. Like there's no logical reason why you would say that homework is the key thing that's making students stay up late. Really, the key thing is probably like TikTok and Instagram. Like that's probably really why students are staying up late, or maybe just the fact that they want to study more for their tests. So this is just like something that would really not be supported. And so for that reason, that's enough to eliminate choice A and then go for D here. So for these ones as well, one more thing I can mention here, you're often trying to go for a more vague, I guess you could say, like a more broad choice rather than an ultra narrow one. That's just a useful thing for a lot of passage questions. That's not always the case. Don't just assume that's always going to be the most broad one, but more times that is what happens. Okay, then we have this one. This one is a very confusing one. This is one where I could really feel if this is like a one that many students would get wrong when seeing it for the first time. I'll just say a couple things about this just to try to simplify it a bit more. First of all, these summaries are really going to be absolutely important on a question like this. Obviously, you need to really understand every single line going into it. Otherwise, it won't make as much sense. You don't need to memorize like the numbers. You don't have to memorize like it was 11.8% and 0.6%. That's not something important. All you really know is the overall direction being said here. So for example, this you could see 11.8 is more than 6.1. So, that is the overall thing you're saying. More tin in this one, less tin in that one. And then this one has less lead and then more lead. So that's the overall idea here. And then you have to really think about what this last part is saying. It says glazes with less than 10% tin were widely considered unsuitable for premium wear. So they need at least 10%. So like this one would not have made the cut up here. The scientists suggest that a brief decline in consumer confidence likely occurred around 60-55 and it's probably a race. Okay, so consumer confidence, I guess the consumers, they were not thinking that they were meeting the standard. They assumed that the tin was cooked, was bad, not good tin, not enough tin maybe. And so then it was eased, so people started feeling confident again, despite the workshop's continuing obligation to deliver a fixed annual quota of refined tin to the city council. Okay, so they have to give the same amount of tin every single time to the city. So no matter what, same amount of tin every single time. When the master potter after 1655 chose to. So now, I think hopefully, assuming you didn't understand this entirely the first time you read it, it might make a bit more sense what's going on here. So yeah, it sounds like they are saying here that they need a certain amount of tin in every single thing that the people are buying. But there's a fixed quota of the amount that they can include. And there's a decline in consumer confidence. So people are not feeling like there's going to be enough tin, and they also need to make sure that there is enough tin. So kind of like two conflicting ideas here. And so then it becomes maybe a little bit clearer to see, keep the amount of tin oxide used per batch consistent with that in the glaze measured in 1655. So this, what it will literally be doing is saying, okay, there's still the same amount of tin, but we're just reducing its total size. So we're making like less stuff, basically supply and demand here. They want the tin really badly. So, okay, we're going to give you the tin, but we're going to make less of it. You probably have to pay more for it as well. So hopefully it makes a bit more sense. The main thing I'm just trying to say with this question here is the importance of summarizing. And I noticed this was one closer to the end of the test. So this is where I was really feeling that idea I said over in number 7. Don't let stress confuse your understanding. If you're reading this for the first time, still try to fully understand what's going on here. Try to get the main idea. Don't feel like you have to rush on something like this because you're running out of time. Okay, on math. So we really only had 2 different things here. So pretty good job overall in math. I really agreed with a lot of the stuff you did in most of the questions. So there's 2 things I noticed. First of all, checking the stuff. So this is kind of a very simple thing. Like it's probably not really that important to mention at all. But if you do have time to check your answers in math, for example, in module 1, it's a good idea to try to find a different way to check it than how you originally solved it. You may have heard other people say this before, but it really is good advice. So for example, if I see something like this question, let me go ahead and solve it how I would normally do. So yeah, I probably would normally just solve it by this, using a table regression, that kind of stuff. But if I'm now at the end of the test and I want to check this answer, one way I could solve it, I guess one way that I could think about this is I could literally just like rewrite the functions, like negative 3x plus 15, I think. And let me just go ahead and see, okay, if I put 2 in here, yes, we get 9. If I put 7 in here, yes, we get negative 6. And if we put negative 1 in here, yes, we get 18. So that's just another way I could go about checking it. It's different from how I originally solved it, and so if I made a mistake in that first thing, I'm probably not going to be making that same mistake again. Another way you could solve this, if you want to go ahead and use the regression without a table, that's also a perfectly valid way. And along with that, yes, always check as well. You know, I did notice that you kind of just like seeded the last like 3 to 5 minutes of the test and didn't really look at the module 1 in those last few minutes. You did get some module 1 questions wrong, so honestly, it probably would have been really useful for you to have used those last 3 to 5 minutes. So yeah, really just always use the time. You know, if you're getting module 1 questions wrong, I think, you know, even on practice tests, you should be always using the full amount of time, and definitely on the real thing. And then the second thing I just have here is a similar thing for reading, which is skipping. I noticed that there didn't seem to be any questions in Math Module 2 skipped. The way that I always say to think about this is when you're seeing a very complex math question, like let me try to find a complex one. Like, I guess a good example may have been arguably this. Okay, probably not even. Okay, I don't think I even have one listed here because I didn't use all the ones that you missed. But yeah, let's say you are seeing a very complex one, like probably one of those last ones in Module 2. Like I know there was one that you spent a lot of time on. That was like a free response one about like supply and demand with the company. Those kinds of questions really just skip and come back to it at the end, similar to what I said to do for the reading passage questions. There may have been a chance you could have solved genuinely more questions if you had skipped that one and come back to it at the end and maybe just seeded that one rather than the like 2 questions you did have to seed. So if you ever just go to a question you can tell going into it, you're not sure exactly how to solve it, maybe you'll be able to figure it out, but more likely what a better idea would be is just to skip and come back to it later. And you really should start trying to do this in practice tests, because if you don't start doing it now, when you get to the real thing, you're definitely not going to be comfortable with doing it. It's going to be really bad. Okay, let me just quickly go over some of the questions you missed. I'm not going to do any of the ones that you just did not have time for, because I'm just going to assume that you probably can figure those out. But if you want me to, obviously you can post those in the Mission 1400 Plus community and I can try to do them later today. So for this one, first of all, I noticed you were kind of confused on this one because you're trying it out again and you're getting the same answer. The big thing just to know with this is that there's a small mistake that you made here, which is that you were saying here the 8% was applied to the 125. So you're saying here like you did 125 times, let's say 0.8, and then you would have added, let's say 8% of 125. That is how you get 110. But notice here, it's saying it's applied to the discounted price, not to the regular thing. So it would not be 125, it would be to this new price, 125 times 0.8. So the way that I would say just to try to avoid this mistake, here's how I think you should try to solve these problems. Just go ahead and don't use any kind of weird stuff. Just try to do it with decimals and without subtracting or adding anything. Just use the decimals and multiplication themselves. Let me show you what that looks like. So 125, I would do times 0.8, and then just go ahead and do it times 1.08. That's literally the simplest way, and yes, we get to 108. That's so much simpler than if I did something like 125 minus 0.2 times 125 and have to worry about all those details here of subtracting and adding. Multiplication alone is definitely the best way to go about doing this stuff. And I should mention as well that I think this is one where really checking Module 1 a bit more definitely could have prevented you from missing it. So just that same thing again. Second one here, I noticed you're struggling a bit on this one. This is definitely a much harder one as well. I'm not sure if this, I think this is a Module 1. I'm not sure if it really is a Module 1 level problem, maybe one of the last ones in Module 1 possibly, but median and median. So the way I would say to start a problem like this is drawing this kind of configuration, because this makes it so much easier to visualize what is going on here. You may have done this on paper, I just maybe did not see it because you didn't put in Desmos obviously, but this is really what you should do for any time they say median and then also mean. And okay, let me go ahead and solve it now. So 15 positive integers, the mean of dataset A is 8. So the mean of all of this would be 8. And a way I could write this in here would be n divided by 15 would be equal to 8. Therefore, there must be 120 total if we add everything together. Okay, so this altogether would be 120. And then it says here, the median is 7, as I already show here, and says dataset B consists of the 5 largest from dataset A. So this would here be B. And it's saying which is the maximum value of the mean of dataset B. So we have to think, we're just trying to make B as big as we possibly can make it, the biggest possible values. But there are some very key limitations here. First of all, 7 must be the median of this data set. So all these numbers down here, they must be less than 7. And so if we're trying to make it as big as possible here in B, the thing we could just do is just say all these must be 1. Like, because it can't be 0 because it says they must be positive. So all of them just must be 1. And that gives us a lot to work with over in this side over here. Because think about what's going on here. We're basically saying 120 minus 7 minus 7 times 1. So we have 106 left to work with. If these were equal to like 10 instead, it would be like minus 7 times 10, which would be a lot more taking away. We only have 43 to work with now. So as low as possible. Plus you can even make it 10 because it has to be less than 7 as well. Then it's saying here that we're trying to make b as big as possible, like I said before. So how can we make it as big as possible? Well, let's also go for the smallest possible numbers over in these 2 slots here. We have 2 slots in between 7 and this because it is the 5 largest. So what we can just literally do is say these must also be 7, because it can't be lower than 7 because then they would go on this side rather than here. They also should not be any higher than 7 because that would make it so they would be taking numbers away from the mean in b. But 7 alone makes it perfectly fine. So then we can just go ahead and do 120 minus 7 for the mean, minus 7 for both of these over here, and then minus, let's just say 7 times 1. And now we have 92 left to work with for the mean here. So 92 divided by 5, that would be 18.4, which, 92 divided by 5 is just the answer. So just to summarize that, if that makes sense, you're keeping 7 as the median. All these have to be less than 7. You're trying to reserve as many numbers as possible for the ones greater than, so just make them 1. Then these should both be 7. Yeah, let me put 1, that to make it, so those are both 7 because it can't be any less than for here. And then you have everything left for the b over on this side. Okay, this one here, we have a circle with the radius 15, ABC is inscribed in it, which AC is diameter, the length of BC is 18. Okay, so a bunch of stuff in here. I just drew a diagram of what's going on here so you can see this whole thing is 15, this would be 18. And so one important rule that maybe you did not know before solving this problem is that when this is the case, you know that this triangle here must be a right triangle. I know that because it's anytime the hypotenuse of a triangle is the diameter of a circle, you just know it's a right triangle. That's just a rule I have that I say in the geometry course, but yeah, in case you did not remember that, that's always the case. Okay, next thing we can just do is just use regular right triangle stuff to solve this problem. Like really, there's not too much else we have to do. So we have this being 18. I can just go say 18 squared plus b squared is equal to 30 squared, because this whole thing would be 15 for a radius and then 15 for the other one, so 30 in total. So 24. So therefore, this one over here must literally just be 24. Okay, how do we solve the rest of the problem? Well, we can go ahead and figure out what this altitude would be, because this basically is an altitude from B to D. So I can even just say here, length times length divided by base, that's one of the altitude formulas. So I can say 24 times 18 divided by, again, it would be 30. So that gives us 14.4. So this here must be 14.4. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to figure out what DC would be. Notice DC is not 15, that is with this extra OD also included. So we have to figure out what just the DC alone would be. That also is Pythagorean theoremable, if that's a word. So I can say 14 squared plus b squared is equal to 18 squared. So therefore, for b would be 10.8. So this would be 10.8. And then we know the whole thing must be 30. So we can say 30 minus b. So that gives us 19.2. If I go ahead and do 19.2 divided by 10.8, we get here 1 point this, which it would be equal to 16 divided by 9. So that's how you solve that one there. So a bit more complicated, but not too bad here. Then finally for this one, I'm not sure if you noticed this, but yes, your answer here would technically be correct, but it says here that k must be a positive constant, so therefore you can't go for a negative one, you have to go for d. So kind of a trick question there, but yeah, both would work to make no solutions in case you're wondering. So just a couple final thoughts here. I would really say for your next practice test, the top things I want you to focus on are the skipping stuff for both math and reading. Make sure that you're skipping when you need to be skipping. Also trying to improve the uncertainty about grammar. And then also trying to memorize the vocab roots and prefixes before starting. Those are the 3 things I would really say to focus on before the next test. Otherwise, I think you did pretty well here and you are really understanding a lot of this stuff. You're really doing quite well. It's just a few things that are really holding you back right now. Okay, let me know if you have any other questions. Again, if you want a practice test review of your own, you can check the link in the description and join Mission 1400 Plus today, only keeping it open until August 14th, 2026. All right, guys, I will see you in there. Thanks so much for watching, and make sure to always stay Gucci.